So this, the page you have there on the right,
Mm-hmm.
is that the genealogy? We have the whole genealogy of the Hawkins family before, but this is the genealogy of the Douglas family.
As well as I could collect it,
Okay.
yes. It is just and that's self-explanatory, all of it. As much as I know, you can find out for yourself like I did.
And the things that I find interesting here are that it starts, the Hawkins family, we started back like in the 12th century, and this is starting in the 17th century. But it's confusing because there's a bunch of William Douglases. It's like there's a second William Douglas, that must have been his son, and then there's another William Douglas.
It's a very popular name, I guess, because my mother's brother, yes, my mother's youngest brother was named William, what we called him, William Douglas, we called him Uncle Bill for William. And then Burke's middle name, and my brother, my sibling, it was Burke William, so they kind of kept that William going in the Douglas family, but those are the main ones that I know of, but it seemed very popular.
And was your grandfather's name was William too, wasn't it?
What's that? William Byron, yes.
William Byron.
William Byron Douglas.
So after all the genealogy, I think that's who we're looking at, isn't it?
Yes, that's my grandparents. The first one, the small picture, is Grandpa and Grandma Douglas's wedding picture. And then, of course, we didn't know them at that time. And then this next picture, the big one, is what they look like as I knew them growing up. And this was a good picture of them. So that's William Byron, and this is
Lizzie.
Lizzie, but her name was Elizabeth.
Oh,
okay, Grandma, they called her Lizzie Douglas. And so, okay. The next picture at the top is my grandmother. I'm not sure the one on the far right, if that's, she doesn't look like my grandmother per se that I remembered it. Maybe this is the way the picture showed her. I didn't, but these other two are my grandma Douglas's sisters. And they had, one of them, or both, there were two daughters named Nyntha and Vanita, and they were cousins of my mother. And that's all I know. They lived up close to Seattle, that family did. And when we visited Aunt Anna, Uncle Rodney's wife, when she was older, she told me most that I knew about the family up around Seattle. And that was my grandmother's sisters and their families. And then down on the left is the 4 generations of the Douglases. And that's my grandmother, Lizzie Douglas, my mother, and then seated is Lizzie Douglas, my grandmother's mother, so that would be my great-grandmother. And then Fred and Joy, yes, Fred and Joy in that picture. So that was the 4 generations
of Douglas women.
And Fred was in there too.
Well, we'll just give him
an extra.
Let him hang with the girls. And then the one on the right is everybody plus your great-grandmother?
Yes, my great-grandmother in this picture, the first picture on the left, is she is my great-grandmother. She was the mother of Lizzie Douglas.
And then isn't somebody's...
Then on the picture on the right is Grandma Douglas, and her 2 sisters are there, but they weren't standing right behind my great-grandmother. I'm not sure if that was another sister. I don't know who she is.
Because one says 4 generations, one says 5 generations, so we're missing...
Well, yes, because my grandmother's sisters were in that.
Well, that's the same generation, though.
But not in the picture on the left.
Okay.
Is the same generation, but see, Fred and Joy, then we have Bert in there also.
That's okay. We can
anyway, this is the Douglas, not a picture of the Douglases. My mother's on the far left, standing.
Okay. And then on the top right?
The top right is is the a group of the Douglas clan, so to speak.
And the one at the bottom looks...
Is, well, my Uncle Bill on the far right, he must have been in World War I. Then there's my mother and Grandpa and Grandma and Uncle Rodney, my mother's oldest brother on the left, and my mother's youngest brother on the right, and then my mother standing next to the youngest, to Uncle Bill. And then there's Joy and Fred and Bert.
As a baby.
That Grandma, let's see, it was
Your
Eliza Ranson, which is, that's my great-grandma.
So it's your great-grandmother, your grandmother, your mother, and her children.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then Joy is that's the, you know.
Okay. And do you have any particular memories of? Well, you were born.
I was born in this picture.
And Uncle Bill looks like, well, the top one, since you were a baby, this was the top one's 1925, so the bottom one had to be like just after World War I.
Well, am I in the top picture?
Yeah, your dad's.
Oh, my dad,
yeah.
holding me. Oh, I was a baby. But this is, let's see, this is the only picture I think I have of Uncle Bill's first wife, Aunt Vera, who was the mother of Fern Douglas.
Who you were close to.
Well, as close as one of the Douglas. She was more my age, where the other two children were Joy and Fred's age. So I knew Fern better than the older children.
And the reason, I mean, we see a lot of the pictures that we see generally are of you with your cousins in Berkeley in California. We don't see a lot of you with cousins in Ontario. And is that because most of the Douglas family lived in California?
I think by the time we lived in Ontario, they were growing up in school, and see, Fred and Joy. Joy was in high school, and Fred was a year older than she was. And probably our cousins, the Douglas cousins, were in school also. I don't know, but we didn't see them in Ontario until, I don't recall seeing them in Ontario. We had a Hawkins family reunion, but there are no Douglases there.
And I guess what I'm trying to glean is that the Hawkins, after the fire, a lot of the Hawkinses moved to Ontario. So then as you grew up, you were physically closer to your Hawkins relatives, and so that's why we see a lot of photos of the Hawkinses and not as many of you with the Douglases, because the Douglases were all in California, and that's just a long ways to go.
That was quite well, and then some of them were older, like Fern. I saw her when she was about Tommy's age, there in Ravendale. She was there with Grandpa and Grandma. Douglas came to visit, but her parents, Uncle Bill and Aunt Vera, were separated, and so Fern was probably, I don't know if she's in this picture or not, she should have been, but I was a baby, so evidently Fern was probably just a year old.
Yeah, she's there.
Is she there? Yeah. Okay. Yes, so that's all the Douglas family that we had.
Well, it's nice to have them all in one single photo.
One picture, yes. And the lower picture, we've already talked about that one. And on the next page is Grandpa and Grandma Douglas in their later years. They lived in Chico, California. When I was in college, I went down and spent some time with them. Oh, in Chico, it was the Sacramento Valley, and was it ever hot. We spent most of the day trying to keep cool. Of course, there was no air conditioning in those times. And we would take 2 or 3 baths during the day just to cool off. And then we ate cold drinks. You know, Grandma would fix them something cold to drink. And that's about the way we go through the summer.
Was that the trip that you took with Uncle Bert and Aunt Helen?
Well, during that time when I was visiting them in Chico, my dad called and said that my grandma Hawkins, his mother, was quite ill, and Alta, my stepmom, who was a nurse, went up to take care of her, so Daddy wanted me to come home and help because Alta was spending her time up with Grandma Hawkins. And so Bert flew down. He had a, forget the name of that kind of plane. Anyway, a single wing plane that was used in the service.
The B-52?
And was the VT,
Oh.
I think,
Doesn't
I
matter.
don't remember. I used to know, but I don't remember. Anyway, Bert sat in the front cockpit, and Helen and I, there was a second cockpit behind Bert, and Helen, there was only one seat, and there were two of us girls, and so we'd take turns sitting on each other's lap, and the one standing up would have to kind of lean over because the hood
Glass
over us.
hood.
Anyway, so we went from Chico, California, flew up to Ravendale.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I guess we
I flew up to Ontario.
Ontario, yes, excuse me, thank you. At the Ontario airport, as I recall. But anyway.
And so but when you were younger, they lived in, is that the connection to Shasta? They lived in Mount Shasta?
Well,
so that's
yeah,
why
I think so, because we would go to
Shasta?
no, not to Shasta, McLeod.
Oh,
I'll get that pretty soon. We'd go to McLeod for Thanksgiving, as I recall, because it was quite a bit of snow between McLeod and Mount Shasta. And my grandparents lived, and they were probably no, they were not too old then, because I was just little. I just remember making a trip
To
up
Shasta?
there
Or
to
McLeod?
McLeod, yes. And so
So
this
they
is,
never, I'm trying to understand why there are people buried in Shasta. What was it?
well, because that was where Grandpa and Grandma lived for quite a
Okay,
while.
so
I think.
this couple lived in Shasta. Your grandpa Will, and your grandma Lizzie.
This picture.
Yeah,
oh, okay.
yeah.
Yes, they moved from Chico, California, and as they got older, their sons wanted them to live in Mount Shasta so they could look after them and take care of them.
Oh, okay.
And so that's where they were. That's why so many people were buried in Mount Shasta, because my mother's two brothers and her parents lived there. And so my mother is buried in the Mount Shasta Cemetery, my dad and Tommy,
Okay.
my little brother Tommy, who passed away right after my mom.
And I'm sorry, did you say that your grandparents are buried there too? And they're buried there because they moved there because their sons wanted them to live there with them.
I'm not exactly sure if Grandpa and Grandma were buried there. I don't remember. I probably did know, but I couldn't say for sure. And then this is, hi Grandpa, we loved Grandpa Douglas. He was a sweet guy.
Was your Grandma Douglas not as sweet?
Well, she was a busy lady, minding the family. But Grandpa was just, he had a cleft in his chin that I used to sit on his lap and I'd touch his chin and then he would gobble at me, you know, to scare me, and then we'd giggle and then I'd put him back on the chin and he would make a noise at me to giggle.
And the dog, do you remember the dog?
No, I never, don't recall ever seeing the dog.
Gotta love a guy that loves a dog.
Yep, his dog. Maybe that's what he had to do because Grandma was tending to everything.
Well, you mentioned also there's a story that you talked about. She had a sewing machine. And
Oh, when we go to her house, yes, we had for dinner. She always, as I can remember, fixed turnips and
carrots.
no,
Oh. Parsnips.
parsnips, and I didn't like either one of them. I learned to like turnips, raw, but not. Anyway, so I think she, at one time, perhaps had some Limburger cheese, and she put some of the hors d'oeuvres or things, I guess, on her little sewing machine. I guess she just had dishes on top of that. Then she was, we were talking about that darn Limburger cheese, and she said, well, one time she had a cat. I don't know how true this is really, but she said she had a cat, and after they took the Limburger cheese off, maybe some had spilled on the sewing machine, and she said that cat got up there and scratched all the varnish off the sewing machine trying to cover it up.
Bury the Limburger cheese.
That was a joke I remember of my grandmother.
And so she had a good sense of humor, maybe?
That's only, I don't know. She sewed for us. She did a lot with us, helped us a lot. But she just kind of wanted to run things, and that was not up my dad's sleeve. He did not want somebody telling him what to do, or with his family. After the fire, she had a place for each one of us to go because she knew our mother wasn't there, and she was trying to, I guess, in her mind, she's trying to take care of us good and help. And she wanted one child to go live with this person and relatives. And then my dad said, our family will stay together. And so Fred came up, and Joy came out of school. She did return to high school when things got settled down in Ontario. And Fred came up from Turlock, where he and his wife and her parents, and so he came up to help Dad too. And then things didn't work out for Pearl too well. Her name was Pearl Duarte. Duarte. And anyway, so she's kind of a spoiled little girl, I guess. So anyway, I guess she didn't want to live with the family. I don't know the particulars of it at all. But then on the next page is my mother and her two brothers.
When they were just little things.
Yes, they were just young. And then the next page is and cousins, Nathan and Benita. They were from Seattle area. So that's my mother and two of her cousins. So, and her cousin's mother was my grandmother's sister. So that's the only way. I've never met them that I know of. And then in the bottom, Grandpa Douglas wanted all the kids lined up on this log, and he wanted to take our picture. And so,
no, go ahead.
So we went from tallest to the youngest, and guess who's at the tail end?
Is that you?
Yeah.
Little Dolly?
Yeah. And Fern was right next to me, so she and I were kind of an age. And Tommy and Fern were of an age, and he was 2 years older than I, and Fern was 1, so she was kind of between Tommy and I.
And so this is all of your grandfather Douglas's grandchildren, with the exception of Aunt Betty's children.
Yes.
Okay. Wow. Okay, that's
Aunt Betty and Uncle Bill's children. Yes.
Okay. And Fern was Uncle Bill.
Uncle Bill's
first
daughter by his first wife, Aunt Vera.
Okay.
All right, and this is a good picture of Uncle Bill and Aunt Betty next to his, I guess it was Uncle Bill's pickup, and this was, I think that was the school where Aunt Anna taught behind them. They lived right close to the school. And Aunt Anna just lived kind of around the corner from Bill and Betty, but she taught at this school for years.
And Aunt Anna is Uncle Rodney's wife.
Correct, good for you.
And so Betty and Anna were Douglas's by marriage.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Good girl. You kind of
Thank you.
remember that. You don't have to tell people who ask questions. Okay, on this next page, I can't move this, but what's the top one? Douglas. Douglas clan. Yes, those are all, and it's self-explanatory that we've talked about them. And then the bottom picture is of, I can't read it, Carol.
That's okay. I have before we go to the bottom, on the top picture, there's one person in that picture we haven't seen before, and that's Bill Jr.
Oh yes, that Bill and Betty's only child, and that was Bill Jr. It must have been another William, I imagine they named him.
Oh yeah,
William. But we called him Billy for short. When he was little.
The bottom picture
is the Douglases and our family. Yes, that was Uncle. Is Fern in there?
Yeah, Fern's in there, and her mom's in it. It's the only picture of her
mom. Oh, that's right. Well, there was another one that we saw with Aunt Vera in there. Yes.
And a young Aunt Anna, a relatively young Aunt Anna.
Well, their children were small. There's Harold in the front. That was her youngest. So yes, relatively young. And then, of course, Aunt Vera, Uncle Bill looks very young there, too. You know, on the end.
Oh, yeah.
And
he was handsome.
Yes, he was. And he was one of our, I won't put it in writing, but he just had a personality that we all loved.
Was he a kidder?
I don't remember. He just had a personality that was fun, kind of fun.
Uncle Bert, a twinkle.
Well, yes. I don't know he was as mischievous as Uncle Bert was when he was a kid, but he was one of our favorite uncles anyway.
We
So,
won't tell anybody.
yes, and that is Fern's mother there, Aunt Vera. And so the rest is pretty well self-explanatory. And then, this was a great day when Aunt Anna turned 100. She lived in an assisted living home, and she had a cane. She was legally blind at that time, but she knew how to get around. Could see enough that she knew her way around the assisted living home where she lived. But on her 100, now remember, she was a teacher and she traveled a lot, and her mind was very good at 100. And so for her 100th birthday, they had a stage there for her so she could see her audience. And she stood in front of her chair. She got her hand on the chair, and she recited 2 readings. The first one, I cried. I had tears running down my face out of sheer admiration. It was not a funny or a real sad one. I don't remember, but I know I was so amazed at her memory. By memory, she did that. And then on the bottom picture, her son, Harold, that you can see as a little boy in the far picture, he was helping her, and had been a teacher, a principal, and then at this time, I don't know at this time, but he became superintendent of the schools down there where they lived. And so Aunt Anna told him he was tending to her, and she said, "If I pause, don't coach me." She said, "It'll be for effect." And he didn't. And she had those 2 readings by memory. The second one was comical. And so I don't know if I cried or laughed on that one, but the first one, just that she could do at 100 years old, remember those readings by memory.
I bet you could do that.
I don't know any readings to recite except the ones I did when I was in grade school, and I don't remember them. I remember the titles.
You could get out some of Grandpa's poems, a bit of Grandpa's poems.
Pardon me?
I said I bet you could remember some of Grandpa's poems
Poems?
by heart.
Oh, well, no, not all of them, just some of them. Anyway, do you want to discuss
Yeah.
these? Well, the top one was at Uncle Bill and my uncle, Uncle Bill, was my mother's youngest brother, and
Your
this
favorite.
was at his funeral.
Your favorite.
Well, he
Just
kind of
between
was.
us.
Uncle Rodney was a dear, but Uncle Bill was more lively, I guess, anyway, he just played with us more, I guess, because he was younger. But this is his daughter, Fern. His daughter with Aunt Vera that you saw in some of the 4 pictures of a small child. She went to college, and I think sociology, I'm not sure, was her major. And then this sitting in the chair by herself is Aunt Betty, and Uncle Bill's wife.
Oh, okay.
All right, so she was a stepmother to Fern,
Okay.
and she was also her sister-in-law because she married, Fern married Betty's brother.
Oh, wow.
So that's my own grandpa sort of story.
I think there's a
She
good
was
story
her-
behind that.
Betty was her stepmother and also her
sister.
sister-in-law.
Wowza.
Yes, that was, and let's see, who's that standing behind? Oh, that was another one of Betty's brothers.
Oh, okay.
Let's see, well, both of them are sitting. Who's that behind them?
It
Can
says
you read?
her brother, somebody's fun brother behind fun brother.
Other 2 men are Betty's brothers.
That's okay. We can read
Well,
that.
yeah, anyway, it says under there who they are. The bottom picture is one I found
Fraser.
that had Aunt Betty and Aunt Anna. They had lost their husbands, both widowed, and so they did a lot of traveling together, the 2 of them. And I think Aunt Betty's eyes were better. Aunt Anna eventually was legally blind, so maybe her eyes, she wasn't driving. And Alta, who was a sister-in-law, they were all sisters-in-law of a different family, but they were the ones that were the older ladies that were left, and so
That's a great
That's
picture,
it's-
Grandma.
yeah, Yes, it's a great picture of all of them, I feel.
And it's really it's the only picture of Grandma in here that was relatively recent, just before she died. I mean, not long before she died.
Nancy, well, this was Nancy and Ken, Nancy Hawkins and Ken.
Right.
Wedding.
So maybe 10 years,
but
not even 10 years, because Grandma passed. I remember that we went to visit her when I was in college, and she passed not long after that. So it wasn't that much longer. Maybe.
She lived down in Dallas, Oregon, where Fred was ministering down there in Dallas, and so she was down there, and she had the car that Dad and Alta went back and bought new, and so that was kind of her car. But when she came from California to marry Dad, she had this Ford coupe that was had a rumble theme back that I talked about before. And so Dad got the DeSoto, they got it brand new, and so Alta was able to have that to drive around in, and Dad had his trucks and his business.
Okay.
So Alta, I remember Colleen telling the story about she was riding with Grandma, went to town, I guess, and I don't know whether what they had, or if Grandma had gotten her a treat, or whether she had a napkin or a tissue, and so she wasn't going to throw it out. And Grandma said, "Throw it out the window." And Colleen said, "No, Grandma, that's littering." It's when that was all going around. And Grandma said, "Throw it out the window." And Carol, I don't know if Colleen cried or not, but she didn't want to do that.
It.
Yes, because Grandma was from the old time, you know. But this was new. She was hearing that in school, Colleen was.
And on television. There were commercials on television, not to litter, as I recall, yeah.
Yes, Colleen was little, yes. I guess
forest fires and litter, as I recall, but I could be wrong.
Well, who was that bear that was, what was the name of the bear?
Smokey.
Smokey the bear.
Smokey the bear.
Okay.
Forest fires.
Well, we're not talking about, this one at the next page is, now you saw pictures of Harold and Merle when they were children. That was Uncle Rodney's son, Harold. And now this is with his wife, that her name was Ann. No, that was Marge Douglas. And they had 2 children. Well, then later, as the children got older, Ann passed away, and so there was a girl that lived next to Uncle Rodney and Aunt Anna when the children were growing up, and her name, I thought, it just lost me right there. But anyway, she was a girl. She was kind of sweet on Harold all the time, but he married
Marge.
Marge. He married Marge. And so later on, I guess he was, when he'd go to visit his parents, so anyway, the girl that lived next door, her name just left me, and they kind of started seeing each other in later life, and he eventually married her, and they lived down in Stockton, close to Stockton, because your dad and I went down to a wedding that was, Eilena's son's wedding was down in, I think it was in Stockton or Sacramento. I don't think it was Sacramento, I think it was Stockton. And Harold, they lived right close to there. So we stayed at Harold's and went to the wedding, and then went to see Aunt Anna. I think that was the time, my memory could be a little mixed up at this time. But anyway, so Harold and Olga Holtorf was her name, that lived next door to Aunt Anna and Uncle Rodney, and that's growing up. She kind of had her eye on Harold. But
for years.
I guess for a year. I don't think she was ever married until after Marge passed away. Then she was a neighbor, and I guess it was just handy.
Yeah, well, yeah, and she'd already had a crush on him, so it was easy for him. He didn't
but she was a very nice lady.
And you said that Anne died young?
I don't know how young. See, this is her. Okay. Her children were that age, and I don't remember. Okay. I think they were pretty well along when she passed away.
So that's the Douglas family.
That's the Douglas family.
Any other memories of your grandparents?
Oh, well, the only thing I can remember one time when they were visiting us, it must have been around September when school was going, and they were still up there, so wasn't too far into the winter, I'm sure. And Joy and I went to the schoolhouse, as you saw back in Ravendale. The school sat on kind of a little hill, and Joy was hired, I think, to clean up the school in the morning before school, and light the fire in the stove and get the schoolhouse warm, and then sweep the school. Well, she had the sweeping done, and she's waiting for the fire to get going so they could heat the school. And so we went outside. There was a giant straddle, this little tall pole stood straight up, and then there were chains hanging down all around. I don't remember how many there were. And then they had a crossbow. They had chains on the side, and the cross connections were of wood. And you could hang on to those, one for each hand, and then go around, and you would be swinging out practically flat. And so I was only first to second grade, I think second grade. And I told Joy, I said, I'm slipping. Well, she was an 8th grader at that time, and so she did the power on it. And I told her I was slipping and I couldn't hang on. Well, she tried to stop, but not enough. And I flew off and landed right in the hole at the bottom of the slide that was there. And so she came to help me up. Did I already tell this story?
I think so.
Anyway, so she helped me up, and we walked into the school, and that was I think I referred earlier, that teacher rubbed turpentine on everything, right. And I had a broken leg, and she rubbed turpentine on it.
She cured it with the turpentine.
And so I think I told about Grandpa and Grandma and my parents were going to Susanville, so Dad held me, leg on a pillow in the rough roads. Anyway, so that's about the main thing I can remember
that's
about
a lot of information, and especially since they were further away, and so you had, of course, fewer memories of them because geographically it was just difficult.
Well, it was in those days. They didn't have very good roads in those days too, I'm sure.
Do you have a picture there that I don't have on the right hand side?
Oh, the right hand side. I'm not really sure. I had heard something about some of the family raising tobacco.
Oh.
And this was the shed, and there they are, putting it in the shed to dry, I suppose. But I asked Larry, the one who wrote the book on genealogy and gave us the whole book of history, and he did not know who had grown it or anything about it. So I had the picture, and so I just put it in the very back.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome.
Did you stop right now?
Okay. Then, yes. Good time.